by the religious teachings of Islam. So I leave you with those thoughts, and in the meantime, I invite your questions. Yes, sister.
For me, as a Muslim, I know what's the meaning of Islam is a complete way of life. But I think I want to mention something to you. You forget something, actually. You mentioned the rights of God, the rights of others, I mean for myself, but others. What's about myself? What's about yourself? I know what's the meaning, but for others who's not Muslim. Because here in this country, I surprised sometimes when they decided to go away, for example, to kill themselves, they decide. They are going for a better life, things like that. So it would be nice if you just mention these things for them.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's a valid point that I mentioned personal, but let me elaborate a little bit more on that in response to the question. So, our own bodies have a right on us. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, your eyes have a right on you. The right on you is that you should give them some rest. And your body has a right on you, so you should give your body some rest as well. So that implies a lot of things. It implies, for example, that one cannot say, I'm worshiping God, and I'm worshiping God so continuously so that he doesn't sleep. His eyes need to rest, and he needs to give his eyes some rest. One cannot say, I'm going to fast continuously day in, day out. I'm going to fast. In fact, there are 5 days of the year when it is entirely prohibited to fast. The days of the 2 Eids and the 3 days following the Eid of the sacrifice. So one cannot fast on these days, it's just simply prohibited. So, but in addition to that, it is recommended that a person does not fast every day. If one wants to fast a lot, the most one can do is to fast one day and eat the next day, fast one day and eat the next day. But the best way is the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who it is reported used to fast on Mondays and Thursdays. And most people who want to fast may fast 3 days in a month, and that's 1/10 of the month. So things should be done with moderation and balance, because our bodies too have a right on us, a right to stay healthy, a right to have some rest and to be refreshed and so on. So against that would be killing oneself. Suicide actually in the Islamic faith is one of the most prohibited actions. And the Quran says, "La taqtulu anfusakum, inna Allaha kana bikum rahima." Do not kill yourselves, because certainly God is merciful towards you. Another verse of the Quran says, "La tulqu bi'aydikum ila tahluka." Do not throw yourselves to destruction with your own hands. So suicide generally is a bad thing. Those who commit acts of suicide in which they kill others say that they're doing so for the sake of Islam, and that this is not an act of desperation and therefore does not fall within the general definition of suicide. But obviously, they're still killing themselves. The Quran did not say, do not kill yourselves out of desperation. It says, do not kill yourselves. So if that's what's prohibited. Do not throw yourselves to destruction. Do not destroy yourselves. And in that case, we see that those who do that obviously are doing wrong, even though they might be doing it for good reasons and good purposes. But remember, we said that if you're doing something, not only must the purpose be good, not only must you have the right intention, but it must also be in harmony with the command of God and with the way of life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So you cannot say, because I have good intention, so let me do this thing whether it is right or wrong. The thing itself must be right. You can't go stealing to give charity, because stealing itself is bad. All right? Okay, yes?
I want actually to ask you how to build an Islamic country in 1, 2, 3 points.
1, 2, 3 points. Okay, you're not going to allow me 10, huh? How to build an Islamic country in 1, 2, 3 points. Well, it seems to me that the basis of an Islamic country will be the people who are going to live in that country. The way in which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received this revelation is that initially the revelation just spoke about the faith, like people should be imbued with the faith. And once they were imbued with the faith, that's when the regulations came to be given. And the regulations that refer to a state can only come when you have the state. So, and the state can only come when you have a believing community. So that's where we start. We start with the community, educating, intensifying the faith, and when it reaches a certain threshold, that's when you can say, okay, now we can formulate ourselves as a community to be governed by the Islamic teachings, because everyone accepts that. But you cannot have a community that do not want the Islamic teachings and then you come to impose it on them. That's not the way to formulate an Islamic state. That's only the way to cause rebellion and more chaos. Yes.
We always say and we always hear that Islam is a complete code of conduct of life. But whenever we see in our communities, like I'm talking about the concept of Sunnah, when we see in our social life and our economic life that Islamic principles are not followed, and it's like we are stick to the faith. It's like 5 pillars of Islam that we are stick individually, we are stick to those pillars of Islam. But in practical, like in socio-economic situations, we just forget these things. Are we not, like, 2 questions related, are we not following the footsteps of other religions? Like sometimes in Christianity, there were times when rules were like under influence of churches. Like they were like religion has influence on the rules and government. And secondly, what can an individual can do to build up a socio-economic situation or socio-economic society by following the Islamic rules?
I'm not sure if I get you like completely, but I feel that you're asking about the fact that we often think of following the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in minor things, but we neglect some of the major things, like in terms of economics and politics. And in those things, we seem to be following some non-Muslim practices. Is that what you're...
Yeah, a part of this, but it's also that day by day, the Islam is becoming an individual's matter. Okay. Like we pray, we fast, we perform Hajj. It's like only the faith. Like when it comes to the society, we don't, in many countries in our society, riba is not banned. Like there are not Islamic rules, and there are rules that are contradictory to Islam, and we just follow those rules. So, are we not following the footsteps of other religions, like I said, Christianity, that ultimately leads to a personal freedom, like we are witnessing today in this part of the world?
Okay. So, to go through this, we should distinguish between Muslims living in a Muslim state and Muslims living as a minority. Muslims living in a Muslim state would have the obligation, at least the state would have the obligation, to implement all of the rules that govern an Islamic state. Muslims living as a minority will not have that obligation because they don't have the state. To put it simply, one can easily understand that a Muslim who does not have the means to perform the Hajj is not required to perform the Hajj. Though we cannot deny that Hajj is part of Islam, but it's not for that individual, right? So in a similar sense, one who lives in a situation where Muslims are a minority has no control over the state powers, over the way in which laws are formed and the way in which the country is governed. So one only might have dominion over one's own personal activities and affairs, and in that sense, that's the much that one can be responsible for. The Quran says, "La yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha." God does not hold a soul responsible except for that which it is capable of. So what you're capable of doing, that's what you're responsible for. You are also responsible for trying to give the message of Islam to other people. And if your message is good, in terms of your own personal conduct and in terms of your words that you speak to others, if people become impressed with what Islam is from your example, then obviously you can have a rippling effect throughout that community. More and more people can become Muslims, embracing that as their own religion until it reaches a certain threshold where the people, for example, form the majority of the society, and they can say, okay, we want the Islamic principles to govern us. and we will give full freedom and rights to the non-Muslims who are a part of the society as well. So then you can have an emerging Islamic state, in which case you will have the responsibility to implement the Islamic State rules as well. In an Islamic state, where the governing powers are Muslims, obviously they do have the responsibility to implement the rules, but two things have happened. One is that many of the ruling powers do not find themselves infused with the Islamic faith. So they might be Islam in Muslim in name, but and to a certain extent practicing Islam, but they don't want to go so far. And to an extent, many of us are guilty of that even where we are in our own affairs, because we may have a Muslim parent restricting their youth from following Islam. They may say, okay, we want you to be Muslim, but not that much Muslim. So then, in that case, we are guilty of the same thing. So how could we blame others? But what we can do as Muslims, even living in those parts of the world, is to continue to work for da'wah, giving the message of Islam until, again, that society reaches that sort of threshold which will make them deserving of better leaders. And in fact, people get the leaders that they do deserve. That's one side of it. The other side of it is that what we have made of the Islamic faith and practice over time has been something that when we look at it as a whole, it doesn't seem practical anymore. We have seen as we look at all of these things how practical, how wise they are and so on, but that's not how traditionally they have been looked at, unfortunately. Scholars over time have looked at the regulations as regulations and just given them as regulations as they are, and given more and more regulations and more finer details, until the regulations are so much and so detailed that it's hard to translate and transpose them from one situation to another. And that has made the Islamic law seem to be out of place in many parts of the world, so that other systems have been imported into Muslim countries that have been used for formulation of law and so on. So both of these need to change. One is that people need to change themselves. The Quran says in Allah, God does not change the condition of a people until they change that which is within themselves. So that's the one side. We need to change. The second side of it is that there has to be a continuing process of ijtihad, of looking at the Islamic law, of thinking about the purpose, the maqasid, the objectives behind the law, and to see how to implement those same laws in a new and different situation in a way that will still capture the original maqsad of those laws. This is where we are lacking in some respect. And there is hope, because the more we're discussing this now, and not only here, but in other places throughout the world, these kinds of discussions are going on. Muslims are thinking, we live in open societies in which we can raise these questions and think about them publicly. That, inshallah, will have an effect and things will progress for the better. Any other questions? Yes.
To say that for an action to be seen as religious or acceptable, the intent has to be right, and has to be agree with the commandment of God and the way of the Prophet. And the way of the Prophet when it comes to prayer is the main prayer in the mosque. The man that's praying in his room today, what is the nature, what is the situation of his prayer? Is it valid or invalid?
Okay. Yeah. So in consonance with the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet, peace be upon him, prays in the mosque. So what about the prayer of the person in his house? Is that valid or invalid? Men specifically. We should clarify that we've already spoken about the range of actions, right? Like on the one hand, an action may be fard or absolutely required. On the other hand, it could be haram or absolutely prohibited. In between, there is something that's mubah. It's indifferent. It's permissible because it's indifferent. Anything that the Islamic rulings do not rule on. There's nothing is said about it in the Quran and the Sunnah. It's in the realm of mubah. And by definition, absolute ashya al-ibah. The basic presupposition regarding things is that they are permissible, unless there is a proof showing that they're not permissible. So you should have a solid proof from the Quran or the Sunnah. So between permissible and fard, there is sunnah. Okay? So something is sunnah, meaning that it's in the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And in the Sunnah, there is a Sunnah Mu'akkada and there is a Ghair Mu'akkada. There's the emphasized Sunnah and then there's the Sunnah that's not emphasized. Now, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, prayed in the mosque, naturally he prayed in the mosque because he was the community leader. And his house was adjoined to the mosque. But you can envision that somebody lives far away from the mosque. Even he is encouraged to attend the mosque. But he might live without earshot of the adhan, in which case he's not obligated to attend the mosque for the prayer. If one hears the call, he's within earshot of the adhan, then he should come to the mosque for the prayer. But even if he prays elsewhere, his prayer will still be valid, as far as I understand. But it's just that he's losing the reward for coming to the congregational prayer, and to a certain extent he might even be committing sin by avoiding or ignoring the call of the adhan. More to the point, some of the scholars say that if you are in a mosque where the adhan was called, you cannot leave unless you're leaving to go and offer the prayer in a jama'ah somewhere else. You should stay and offer the prayer right there. So there is a strictness, but also there is a permission. And one has to be able to balance to know that for some people it is a strict regulation. They must pray in the mosque if they're within the earshot there, and some others they pray at home, especially if they're far away. The Islamic regulations regarding this is really practical. Somebody may be at work, maybe at school, and they can form a jama'ah where they are, especially if they do not have permission to go and offer the prayers in the mosque. Even the Friday prayer, Muslim scholars have struggled with because by definition one should go pray as a jama'ah in the Masjid al-Jami, the masjid in which the Friday prayer might be made. But we know that in many of our present situations, you might be at school and not have enough time to go to the mosque and come back. So I know we have a prayer facility here at the university, which is unique, but often the university might have a small prayer room and the mosque is really elsewhere. So are the students required to leave the university and go to the mosque? Muslim scholars would say, no, we give you permission. Not that we give you permission, but we understand, because they cannot give you permission. Only God can do that. But they understand that God gives you permission to pray where you are, seeing that it will be an inconvenience. So there are two things. There's hajj and there is darura. Darura is a severe necessity, and hajj is just simply a need. So all of the requirements get removed due to darura. But some of the requirements also get lifted due to hajj or need. And so one has to assess the situation that we're looking at. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's on jihad that you mentioned that it is the authority, it is the authority of the head of the state whether we call for jihad or not. We see that we have different nationalities, different countries, and head of the states are from different backgrounds. They are practicing Muslims or not. And we have seen in the past that in the Iraq-Iran war, that one was saying that it is jihad to fight the other country and the other one saying it is not against the other country. So if it is the head of the state, is it not contradicting to the concept of Sunnah?
Which part would be contradicting to the Constitution?
If it is based on the country.
Oh, I see. The countries are a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, the division of the land along nationalistic lines, carving out the geography, carving out the map like that, it is something new. But again, we should try to understand what is the purpose behind the way things are left by the Prophet, peace be upon him. There are certain things which he could not control. He just simply had to accept them as a matter of fact, given the state of affairs at the time. We differentiate between those things that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did by way of illustrating the Islamic teachings, and those that he did just because of the time and place in which he lived, meaning that he had to accept certain circumstances as they are. The manner of governing the Muslim community has been left slightly open in that he himself did not appoint a successor. After his death, Muslims had to ask who would be the temporal successor. And the Muslims eventually decided on Abu Bakr, and then Omar, and then Uthman. And even Abu Bakr decided differently in that whereas the Muslims appointed Abu Bakr and made their pledge to him, Abu Bakr appointed Omar, not leaving it up to the people to decide, but he made the appointment. And then Omar didn't appoint someone who Abu Bakr appointed him. Omar appointed a committee of 6 and pleaded with the people to accept one of the 6, or rather, he pleaded with the 6 to decide among themselves who will be it. And so on. So you can see that even the way in which the righteous guided caliph, the rightly guided caliph, came to be decided upon was different from one caliph to the other. So there's a certain flexibility that is allowable here. A modern nation states did arise partly because the world has opened it up itself to its full frontiers. And how do you have a singular ruler governing the entire geography? It's not a simple matter. So for practical reasons, and also due to internecine wars, the geography came to be divided up like this. So we have to accept that as a fact. That is how it is. Different lands are governed by different rulership, and how should those rulers govern in that case?
There's a last question.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's like a question like observation. Muslims should jihad normally start from jihad of self-discipline, self-discipline. People continue emphasizing on war. And even the war between Iraq and Iraq was not based on Islamic. It was just based on self-aggrandizement or this thing. Because it has nothing to do with Islam, actually. If some people get it Islamic interpretation or whatever, but actually it has nothing. Iraq on one side is based on Ba'athist party, which is contrary against Islam. One to the last one of Ba'athist. They were fighting based on political reasons, nothing to do with Islam. And about people not practicing the religion or community. Nowadays we tend to appreciate Western values more than the religious values. That's why now people are saying people tend to personalize religion and leave the teachings of Islam, only practice prayers and other things. It's all over. Like now here in this country, nobody can force you to drink beer or to go to park. And even now, there are some banks that allow you to open a Sharia account if you don't want interest. But people still go on opening an account where they can have interest. So you have to discipline yourself. You start from yourself before you think of forming an Islamic community. You start from yourself, your family, before you think of. Nobody can force religion on anybody.
Okay, point well made.
Very permissive society where people are allowed to practice their religion more than in the so-called Islamic areas where we live.
Okay, point well made. And anything? Should we close at this point? Or invite anyone last question?
Nothing.
Okay. We'll close at this point, but of course we have other programs coming up. Our chart is going to tell you about those, and I'd love to see you in those programs as well. You may have more questions. Those will be the opportunities that you will have to ask them. Of course, finally, if you do not have a chance to ask them in the monthly forum, you can always send me an email through the Islamic Society, and I'll do my best.
We have some refreshments here, so you could help us out. So yeah, is that okay?